All right, we got the raw meta, a Monster Hunter discussion, and with the flagship weapons of Raging Bracky Dios. Oh baby.
What is up, guys? Greedy Knight here, talking about the raw attack meta and how it has affected Monster Hunter up until Sunbreak. I'll be going
Ooh,
over what the meta is and why raw was dominant for a majority of the weapon roster. Let's get into it.
I'm just gonna go off on a limb and just assume that he's talking about Monster Hunter World, which is the one that got the most popularity. Because I mean, that's I'm just gonna assume that.
The quote-unquote meta in Monster Hunter is the established notion that DPS builds are the most effective at killing the monster in the quickest amount of time.
Yes, this is true. Because when I first started playing Monster Hunter, like my first introduction was Monster Hunter World, and I didn't know anything about it. I just knew I saw my friend play many years ago on like the PlayStation 2, when Monster Hunter first came out, and he had this like gigantic Ethernet cord like hooking from his like modem into his like PlayStation, so he could play like online. And I'd sit back and watch. I'm like, oh, okay, this is kind of cool. A lot of the time, you're just like trying to chase the monster. You're very seldom. Did I actually see like my buddy like fighting the monster? But I think this was like the first Monster Hunter, so I can cut him a break. um, yeah, I mean, after that, I went many years not seeing anything Monster Hunter. And then first, I don't know what made me download Monster Hunter World. Because my first time playing Monster Hunter World was Iceborne. When Iceborne came out initially, that was my first time playing. I didn't play just base World without the Iceborne expansion. And I would assume about at that time that, all the established, well, not really established, but like there was a lot of content online to consume. People already had like the metas figured out for World, and with the introduction of the Clutch Claw, Tenderize, and all this other jazz, it was understood that the monsters had like a lot of HP, like in excess for Iceborne, and you had to Tenderize. And once you tenderize, you only hit that spot, because if you don't, you're gonna end up taking up like 30 to damn near the whole fucking clock, even if you're like an average player, of like the whole hunt. And the idea of like wasting, well, not wasting, but like using the entirety of the hunt clock for a single monster is like, it's a little silly. Um, but yeah.
Your builds provide an increase in your damage, while your weapons combos dictate how fast and how often your attacks land.
Yeah.
The build meta is determined by the math of your gear's damage applied on a given monster for every monster in a given game. The two types of DPS builds are element and raw builds.
Yeah. Damn. This is what? Charge Blade? This is crazy. This is a Charge Blade enjoyer if I ever seen one. Damn, dude. Holy. You know, I mean, and at the time of playing Monster Hunter World, I would understand that the metas of, weapons and gear did tend to skew towards being like as offensive as possible. But I didn't understand that in order to take advantage of the meta builds, you had to just be good. You had to like know where to stand, know your positioning, know like your combos, like frame data and whatnot, and know when to punish, know what moves you can and can't punish. You have to know how to like dodge properly in order to like get the most use out of the iframes and whatnot. I didn't understand that initially, so me naively ended up making a lot of offensive builds, but I ended up getting like really frustrated, and because Certain monsters were easy to like fight against, and then other ones were just they were a real pain in the dick. um, I ended up dying and like taking a lot of damage and like repeating hunts a lot of the time, and I couldn't figure out what was wrong. And it wasn't until like many hours later that it's like, hey, ease up on the offensive abilities and maybe do some defensive abilities. For a lot of the time, like I dabbled in like a bunch of different types of weapons before I settled on sword and shield. And oddly enough, it was when me and my buddy were playing, and I just ended up liking wide range sword and shield because you could pop items without having to sheath. You're like essentially like a healer, and I had a lot of fun doing that. And because I'd either be looking at the monster, trying to get in a couple of like sword combos, or I'd be looking at the health and like, oh, somebody took some damage, just instantly pop a potion or whatever and just heal them up and like just let people just get in there essentially. And I thought that was a pretty fun way. I enjoyed it.
Element sets are designed to boost element and counter a monster's elemental weakness to inflict
Yes.
super effective damage, while raw builds are designed to boost raw damage and apply good damage across all monsters.
Yes. The thing with that is that the game doesn't really explain a lot of like how the damage cards apply to a monster. Like you look at the word affinity and you see a percent, and it's like, well, what the fuck does this mean? Oh, essentially it's just crit. Like crit percent or crit chance. And some weapons you start out with negative crit, which means you have to have like a more like crit eye to like overcome that and whatnot. So it's like, oh, okay, I get it. And then on top of it, you have like the sharpness meter, which I think is fine. You're always trying to go for like a higher level of sharpness if your weapon allows it. And then, you have your attack stat, which is like, you see this big number and it's like, okay, 340. So me as like a casual player, I see the damage number and it's like, okay, I'm going to do 340 damage a hit. Well, that's not really how it works. The monsters have like damage zones on their limbs that correspond to like, like cutting, blunt, or pierce type weapons, where it's like, oh, pierce is good like on the wings, or pierce is bad on tail. And it'll be like a percent of like it's either good or bad on like a certain hit zones for the each respective type of weapon. And then on top of it, you have your elemental hit zones. So again, fire could be good on the head, but it's dog shit on like the back legs or whatever. So there, like, while there was a little card, that you like progress throughout the game with what is it, like the little firefly bugs or whatever, you track enough like footprints, and it'll give you the what do you call it, the hit zones, not like the number value, but just like a very crude version of, you want to use slash on the head or you want to use blunt on the head. And it was like, what was it, like for blunt it was like the hammer, which represented blunt damage, so you got like 3 hammers on the head. Or if you use cut, it would be like a big like knife, it would be represented by like 3 knives or 2 knives or 1 knife, to be like, you should cut right here, it does good damage right here. That's like a very crude way of explaining that, the damage is good here, but it's like shitty here. I mean, I got the gist of it. It did its thing, but it I don't know. It just, I don't feel, and there was nothing to tell you that what a monster. Wait, well, was there or wasn't there? I don't remember. Like, there was nothing that told you whether or not the monster had like good elemental hit zones. I think if you wanted to figure out if it was like weak to like a certain element, I think you need to unlock further into the little fireflies, or like track like with like the footprints to like progress like the little card or whatever to show you like the elemental hit zones. And even then it was just like it's weak to fire and it would show like 3 fires, like 1, 2, 3 right here. And if it's like resistant to something, it would either be like a dash line, which means it doesn't do anything, or it's like it's only weak to water, like one little water drop, or right there. So, I mean, if you look online, there's like a bunch of different, what do you call it, like numbers and like charts and Excel spreadsheets laid out to be like, okay, you want to use a slashing fire weapon right here. You're going to get the most bang for your buck and all that jazz. And on top of it, you have things like crit boost and crit eye that, they only apply to like the raw side of your weapon damage and do not apply to the elemental portion of your weapon. And the game doesn't really say that anywhere. It just says damage increase or critical damage increase. And then you have things like critical element and critical status. It's like, oh, it makes it so the elemental portion of your attack is able to crit. Well, it's like, oh, I didn't know that. Or you do like critical paralysis damage or something. You apply it more. Or you apply like critical sleep damage if your weapon is like a sleep weapon or something like that. It's like, it's kind of confusing.
Regardless of elemental weakness. That begs the question, why are raw builds so dominant? Firstly, it is more
builds are so dominant because they're easier to understand.
More resource efficient to spend materials on one weapon and one build versus 5 elemental weapons and 5 elemental builds, especially during a playthrough where materials and zenny are tight.
Yeah.
Typically,
and also, it wasn't until like the 5, 6, 700th hour of me playing that I started to realize, oh, the fun, like part of the fun of Monster Hunter is collecting all of the weapons, all of the armors, regardless if they're good or bad, in case you want to switch weapons. And, like, let's say you like are 100% sure, like you want to do a longsword for like your whole playthrough. Well, then you go to the little recipe tree and you figure out, okay, I can make all these long swords. I'm going to make them all. I didn't understand the concept of counter building, like for specific monsters. I would just, in my casual brain, I would want to have like one armor and one weapon be good for everything, which is like admittedly pretty lazy. But like, again, I didn't understand that that's like part of the game is like making a bunch of different shit.
Elemental sets require 5 rare drops to get the final upgrade for weapons versus raw build's single rare drop.
Oh,
Second,
yeah, that too.
Raw is the most effective set generally, while Element is supposed to be the most effective set specifically.
Right.
Raw builds serve as the benchmark for whether you run an Element build. If the damage of your Element build is lower than your Raw build against a given monster, you will opt for the Raw build. You won't bother with building the Element set since it will cost materials and zenny for a non-positive return in that instance. The only time you swap to Element is whenever the Element set does more damage than the Raw build.
Yeah.
That's where you bust out the calculator and find out if the best Element weapons can...
You bust out the calculator if you're a hardcore player. If you're a casual player, you simply just continue to use Raw.
...can outperform the best Raw weapons. For this reason, Element weapons are typically reserved for endgame because the amount of investment required to maximize your damage, and you have to deal with the terrible RNG for mantle/orbs to craft said weapons.
Yeah, the mantle drop rates for a lot of the monsters were just like agonizing.
Lastly, several weapons are unable to capitalize on Element when it's below a certain threshold.
Oh yeah.
So you opt for Raw regardless of the benefits of Element sets.
Oh yeah. So like my last, like during the whole return to world thing, I decided to try to main like Charge Blade, which is like, the most complicated weapon. And it's like upon looking at the entire skill tree, I realized that yes, there's a bunch of different types of charge blades, but if you want like an elemental, like if you want a fire charge blade, there is essentially just like one that you go through until you like start to dip into like the higher, harder tiers of monsters. And with like the charge blade, you have either impact files or elemental files. Well, yes, you can have like a fire charge blade, but unless it has the elemental files, well then you're just barking up the wrong tree, and it's like it's kind of pointless. So I wish there would be a little more, I don't know, common sense in terms of like, I mean, at least for charge blade, it was probably the same for, what do you call it, switch axe, like with uh what was it, like impact files, exhaust file, elemental file. There was some like redundancy, like a weapon could be uh like water, but it'll have like an impact file, which is like weird because it's like if you're dedicating yourself to like building an elemental weapon, why wouldn't you put like elemental files on it? It just didn't make sense. And I didn't understand that until I had to watch like a couple videos.
Damage wise, the biggest contributor to your damage is the weapon, so you want to run the best weapons in the meta. The
Yeah.
best raw weapon is pitted against the best element weapon in any given matchup. In practice, even if a weapon had additional stats like low element or status like blast, you can build it like a raw weapon if it had enough raw attack. They
Yeah.
didn't prioritize element investment on these element but technically raw weapons. By contrast, the best element weapons had at least 40 element, but they were balanced to have lower than average raw attack. If
Yeah.
Diablo's weapons had a true raw attack of 370, then good element weapons were often capped at a raw attack of 300, with a similar elemental cap of 50.
Yeah.
Some element weapons had abysmal sharpness, requiring handicraft and razor sharp investment on
Yeah.
top of element investment.
Yeah, there was just a lot of, if you want to have like a good, well, not good, but like if you wanted to have a decent weapon set, you had to slot in certain things like a handicraft to like up the sharpness or whatever. And I understand that the the raw meta, or like just the entirety of the meta, is probably going to be different than, base world versus like Iceborne, where the health pools are like essentially doubled and plus, making it more polarizing in your choices of weapons to use. So yeah, I mean that's like a thing.
It was a common case for an element to be lacking a good weapon line, forcing you to run a garbage stat weapon for said element, or a default to raw weapons. The next reason is the old sharpness modifier.
Yeah.
It was a large contributor to the raw build's success, specifically the purple sharpness modifier. It started in the 3rd fleet with a massive value of 1.5 for raw attacks and 1.2 for element. In 4U, it was nerfed down to 1.45 for raw attack and maintained the 1.2 element multiplier.
Oh, okay. So you're talking about all the games. Okay. So everything is here. It's like 0.5, 0.75. So this is true of all of the games. 0.75, 1. Okay, so there's a little deviation right here where Monster Hunter 3, there's a change. It's like, okay, it was really good right here. And it's like, okay, let's nerf them a little bit. And it was like 1.05. So from 3 onwards, there was a change. So it's like 125 right here. And again, Monster Hunter 3 seems to be the first game that they changed it all. Or wait. Oh no, Monster Hunter Freedom Unite was the first time that they implemented the purple sharpness. And then they quit it in Monster Hunter Portable 3rd. All right. Damn, white sharpness was a G. Was crazy in Monster Hunter G. Dang. All right. Yeah, so they realized what happened and they had to like nerf it a little bit. Like where's world's down here? Like 1.20, 1.32. This is like the consistent thing. They like nerfed it right here and then they decided to upgrade it a little bit right there. And then there during purple, when you got purple, what do you have? it was first at 1.5, and then they nerfed it a little bit, and then they gave it a little more juice right there, and then they decided to nerf it and just keep it right there. 1.39 is like the norm. So it would stand to reason that they're probably going to use, if they keep this entire thing again, it would stand to reason that they would probably use this same layout right here.
The race for purple was a prevalent pattern in the meta because of the massive raw multiplier. The element builds aim for purple to double dip for the element multiplier and the raw multiplier. Purple sharpness emphasis was dialed down because the multiplier was nerfed down to the current 1.39 raw multiplier starting with Monster Hunter GU. This nerf brought raw damage closer in line with element, allowing element weapons to actually shine in later installments.
Okay.
Element is better in the 5th fleet because the element multiplier was buffed to 1.25, rewarding sharpness investment for element weapons more so than raw weapons. Motion values and multipliers dictate how effective raw and element are for a specific weapon type. Attack is applied by all weapons regardless of element. It's just
you know, this like entire like spreadsheet, like a casual Monster Hunter player can grasp this, but most likely knee jerk does not grasp this. Like the only reason that I kind of understand this is because I've watched like a shitload of videos try to understand this a little bit. I'm still like kind of in the dark, you know. I still need to like watch a video to be like, what's the good move? What's the good combo for this time frame? But yeah, like a casual player is not going to look at this at all.
It's just a matter of whether it deals cutting, blunt, or pierce. Element is separated by fire, water, thunder, ice, and dragon. It is only applied when a monster has a non-zero element hit zone requiring one of each element to cover the entire roster because of elemental immunities. Usually element is a 1.0 multiplier, so 100% of your element goes into each of your attacks. The damage formula, in summary, is equal to raw damage plus element damage. Since element is a flat boost to your raw damage, the weapons that benefit the most from element have multi-hit moves. Each hit will apply your element damage in full, only being cut by elemental hit zones. Greatsword is traditionally a raw-centric weapon. It applies one high-value hit that primarily boosts raw damage. Any elemental increase would result in minimal returns, so it's optimal to drop element investment and focus on raw attack. In contrast, dual blades...
But... so like you're using like the polar opposites of like weapon types. You know, you got greatsword, big, slow, one-hit, true charge slash type of weapon. And then you have dual blades, which is like get in, get a couple hits, get out. Casual players don't care about any of this. If a casual player wants to use like an elemental, what do you call it? An elemental greatsword, they don't know it's bad. And so then when they switch to an elemental greatsword and they all of a sudden are having a bad time playing the game, they're going to sit there scratching their head like, why does this suck? Likewise, if somebody just wants to do a raw dual blade build, they're going to quickly understand that if they're having a hard time, they're not going to understand why. Because the game is just kind of hard to understand for a casual.
Have low motion values with the 11-hit Demon Dance and a flurry of slashing combos. Element produces a flat boost to each hit, resulting in higher damage through element investment. However, exceptions to the multi-hit rule are weapon subtypes like shelling, foul type, and ammo types. These subtypes invested in whatever skill boosted its unique form of damage. For example, Element File focused entirely on element whilst ignoring crits, raw damage, and artillery. Shelling focused on artillery and respective food modifiers, while ammo types focus on boosting respective ammo damage like normal or spread. For optimal damage, the ideal elemental hit zone was 25+. This included a small cluster of the monster roster's elemental hit zones
Yeah.
because most of them sat at the 20 element hit zone or lower.
Mhm.
This meant that you had to target a specific hit zone in order to output maximum elemental damage.
Yeah, like again, a casual player isn't going to look at this at all. They are just going to go in on the monster, hit it a little bit, and then just dip out. They're not going to go into the minutia of, am I hitting the head correctly? Am I hitting the wing correctly? Am I hitting the front arm, the back leg, the tail? Like, what's the best spot to hit? I have no idea. Yeah, the casual player just simply does not care. But the thing is that, like, when you come, I don't really know what other people do when they play the game. I just know like what I do when I play the game. So like if I'm having a tough time with a monster, I'll look up a video to be like, okay, well, what am I fucking up with? So then that would lead me to finding something like this. And it's like, oh, the head is a really good place for severing. And what's the highest elemental thing? It's thunder, or not thunder, lightning. So if I wanted to do what is this? Is it thunder or lightning? I forgot. I've been playing too much Dragon Dogma. Let's just say thunder. I have to hit the head with a thunder dual blade or something like that, and I'm gonna get the most bang for my buck. I mean, once you do this with enough monsters, you quickly realize that the best places to hit a monster are the head and like the front arms for the most part. There's a couple outliers here or there, but like, yeah, that's just, it is what it is.
You could use element damage against 20 element hit zones, but the damage was closer to raw builds at this level in older games. Because the raw build served as the benchmark for good damage, you have to check if element did more damage in every given matchup. The 25 hit zone rule is just a common pattern for when an element build outshines a raw attack build, not a fixed law. Most of the time, 25 element hit zones are attached to 45 raw attack hit zones, typically located on the head. A few exceptions are Chaotic Gore Magala's arms, where it's resilient to raw damage and weak to element damage. In Sunbreak, this 25 element hit zone rule shifts down to 20 because the state of element is in a better position in that game. Anything below the 20 element hit zone range will allow raw builds to match or outperform element builds. The element cap is the limit of your base element. When your element is highlighted orange in your stat screen, that means you have reached the elemental cap. In older generations, the elemental cap was 120 of your weapon's base element. Investing into other skills like element attack up was a waste of points. You chose either a respective element boost or the generic element attack up skill. However,
so like one other thing to note is like while you're like going through the game and you're leveling up, well, not leveling up, but like getting different gear, better gear with like more slots and whatnot, you only have so many slots that you can dedicate to offensive abilities. And a lot of the times if you want to play like a decent elemental build, you have to invest a lot of those single slots with just like the element up of that element. And it takes away from you using things like the health up thing, recovery up, or like other little like just quality of life defensive things. So yeah, that's just, so it whenever you just play like a raw build, like yes, you can invest like in attack up or crit eye, which is like about the same thing as like slotting in like an element up or whatever. Crit eye, it's like, oh, the crit goes up, it's for like the raw portion, or attack up, it's for the damage number on the card or whatever. Yes, you can still do that, but whenever you did that with raw builds, like let's say you didn't do like slot in some crit eyes and some attack ups, it wasn't as much of a loss as it was for element builds. if you slotted in like some more defensive stuff.
You ran element crit boost. It was not a boost to your base element, but a multiplier that was applied during crit calculation to bypass the elemental cap. Element performed better in the 5th fleet because Worldborn's cap is 160% of your base element, while Sunbreak has the cap set at 560 element. Basically, there was no functional cap for element in the 5th fleet because boost didn't reach the cap. It allowed weapons aside from dual blades to use element sets to their full potential. Mathematically, when element blows past the 60 element threshold, that is when element shines for more weapons aside from the multi-hit weapons like dual blades and bow. Crank it up to 200 element, every weapon will be in the element camp. In terms of pre-world boost, raw builds had more skills compared to element skills. Raw attack could be boosted by attack up, crit boost, agitator, peak performance / resentment, and Dragonheart to list a few raw skills. In comparison, up until Monster Hunter World, element had a respective element boost for fire, water, thunder, ice, and dragon, a generic element up, and element crit up. It was 6 boosts versus 3. It's no wonder that element was outclassed by raw builds for most weapons because you can raise raw attack damage far more than element damage. In addition, armor sets were limited in space. You could not get your raw skills, element skills, or functional skills all on one set. You had to prioritize the biggest boost and drop the lowest boost. Dual blades dump raw attack in favor of element investment and crits, while weapons like greatsword drop element in favor of raw attack and crits. In World, it was a similar skill lineup, but there was the addition of the elemental augments and overhaul of the armor system, allowing you to slot in everything without having to trade off anything. As for what changed in Red...
like I heard this argument of like power creep in World and Iceborne and Rise and Sunbreak to the point where you have like so many skills on like even like mid game or like end game gear. You just have like so many skills just at your disposal, and it gets like a little ridiculous with how many skills that are just simply on like pieces of armor and whatnot.
Icebreak, a lot of the raw attack skills got elemental skill equivalents along with the conjoined skills like Dereliction and Mail of Hellfire. Despite all the changes in the 5th fleet, raw builds are prevalent for most weapons in World Iceborne because of the Clutch Claw. It has a tenderizing mechanic that increases the hit zone by the following formula. The higher your hit zone is, the lower the boost. The lower your hit zone is, the higher the boost. However, it only applies to the raw side of hit zones, cutting, blunt, and pierce. It does nothing for element, meaning that the Clutch Claw inflated the power of raw attacks to consistently output more damage than element.
Dang. That's crazy. So what, if you ran like an elemental build for anything, you didn't really need to tenderize, but or if you wanted to like increase the elemental portion of your damage, you didn't have to tenderize it. But it just so happened that it is extremely worth it to still tenderize, just because the damage increase is just that massive.
Paired with the fact that several monsters in Iceborne have terrible elemental hit zones, it made elements a subpar build for most weapons. To curb the dominance of raw sets, they made Alatrion's Eschaton Judgment wipe the party if you didn't deal enough element damage by forcing you to run element weapons. So that was the only time element was the meta strategy in a fight. Every other monster emphasized raw builds using Fatalis / Raging Brachadios geared for the usual raw build culprits. The usual element weapons doubled down on respective builds. But Element Foul Charge Blade became an element-centric weapon type with the addition of Savage Axe and its buzzsawing multi-hits. Kajar weapons carried the element builds with its natural crit element boost and high elements values. Weapons like Elatrion, Safijiva, and Furious Rajang were used for Fatalis mix sets. Then why is Sunbreak the exception to the raw attack dominance of older games? I've detailed it in this video linked down below, but basically Capcom leveled the playing field. Every element got a good weapon line with a minimum of 300 attack and white sharpness. The sharpness modifier was changed to nerf raw attack and buff element at the purple sharpness level. Motion values and multipliers were tweaked to balance both sources of damage. Most raw skills now had an elemental equivalent. The new world skill system let you grab everything ranging from raw attack, crits, element, and functional skills. The elemental cap was effectively removed, and the augment system paired with the new element skills let every weapon craft 250 element, making Risebreak the highest element in the series of Monster Hunter. Every weapon that could apply element to their damage output bent the knee to element for optimal damage. Shelling Gunlance and Impact Foul Super Spam Charge Blade ignored the element meta, but they were outclassed by their elemental counterparts.
Right.
The only weapon that is a bastion of raw builds is the Great Sword. In spite of having an element-centric surge slash playstyle, time attackers will opt for the true charge slash playstyle because it outputs more damage as a raw build. Like if this video was useful to you, consider subscribing if you want to see more discussions like this. That's all I got for this one. Greedy Knight, signing out.
Nice. Yeah, that was a really cool video. I liked it. Yeah, like whenever I played World and Iceborne, and I will eventually get around to playing Rise again. I mean, I did it once, just feel like doing it again just for whatever. Whenever I do get around to playing it, I'll give like more elemental builds a shot. But I mean, as a casual player, I had no idea what was like a good, I had no idea about the like what's a good raw weapon, what's a good elemental weapon. These types of weapon are good raw, these types of weapons are good elemental, and it wasn't until like hundreds of hours into the game that I started to understand the differences between it. And I think when Monster Hunter Wilds comes out with all of that whole return to world thing, I think there will be more people that understand what needs to, well, not what needs, but more people will understand the whole dichotomy of like what's a good elemental weapon, what's a good raw weapon. But I don't know if that's like a good thing. Like maybe it just because if I want to play like an elemental, a great sword or whatever, like a casual player isn't really gonna be like getting into like the minutia of the game. But I mean, again, or if I want to play like raw dual blade, I get that those are like two like polarizing sides of the spectrum or whatever. But you know, there are some people that probably have played it to some success. But I mean, I usually just go with whatever just feels good, and I don't even know what type of weapon or like I'm gonna play in like Wilds or whatever. So I mean, here's hoping that they can do a good job for Wilds when it comes out. But yeah, good video, man. I like it, and yeah, I'm excited to see some more. So yeah, that's pretty much it for me. I'll catch you guys on the next one. All right, later.